Hi guys and welcome back. Today I am focusing on a specific texture. I pretty much never ever use texture in my watercolor pieces. If you watch much of my videos, you'd know that I like very flat, controlled washes and sometimes, well, often graded washes. And today I wanted to try something out that was a little bit different. I had been doing research on different watercolor paintings and I really liked some of them that have this kind of a splatter effect, so I wanted to figure it out and see how I can incorporate it into pieces that I do. So to start off, I'm just showing me getting the hang of this splatter effect. At first I tried a canned air approach, but that was just a little bit too powerful of a burst of air and it just like exploded all the way across the paper. So I ended up going back to just me blowing on the paint. And the way that I found that it worked best is that I would create a little puddle of the color and then I'd usually dip my brush back into the water and add it around the edge that I wanted to splatter from, just so that there was extra water there. I wanted to make sure that there was a puddle there. If it was too dry and it was absorbed into the paper, it wouldn't splatter very much at all, actually. And if it's too wet, then it can be a lot more uncontrollable and runny and go a lot farther. And depending on the effect you want, those can be exactly what you're looking for. But I was just looking for a nice balance between that. And what I did was I just got that little puddle ready, and then I lifted the paper right up next to my mouth, and then I blowed on a quick burst of air, and that just allowed it to really splatter in this really energetic and interesting way. And that was the best way that I had it, having it really, really close to my face and then really quick bursts. That was successful, where other parts where if I had it farther away from my face, it was not as successful or not as interesting looking. So this is kind of fun because it was very like the different ways that I did it gave me different results, and I was looking for a specific result this time around, but there's a lot of different ways, different variables that I can change that'll give me different results. So for this first painting, you can see I'm using a micron pen to ink it, and I recorded this terribly. Apparently I had it way too far off camera, so sorry about that. But moving on from that, I was really excited about this one because I wanted this specific painting to have this splatter effect as a very strong part of the design, and that was very different from how I normally think things through and how I have little design elements. So this was really fun because it was pushing me beyond what I normally incorporate into my watercolor pieces. And that's really a wonderful thing because it helps me see what things I am really grateful for in the way that I normally create, things that I normally take for granted as just part of my process, but they're actually really enjoyable or they really work for me. But it also allows me to find new things that I like, and I really liked this effect. It was so much fun to play with. But as you can see, I do have this character that has this hood on, and then around where her shoulders would be, and basically where this hood, this cape would have been wrapped around her, I wanted that to be this splatter effect, so it would be even more like aggressive and shooting out there. And it was actually surprisingly controllable when it came time to use the like splatter effect. So I didn't use any masking fluid or anything on either of these paintings, but what I did was I used a fine liner brush to line up right against where the line work was going to be, and then I painted out and added a puddle maybe about half an inch away from her, varying depending, and then I just made sure that I was blowing in the correct direction, and it didn't actually splatter back at all, which totally makes sense, and it was surprisingly very directional, so I was able to mostly avoid it overlapping where I wanted the line work to be. So it was actually really cool to be able to know that I had a certain amount of control over it. I knew where it wasn't going to be, and I knew what direction it was going to be, and then beyond that, it was just like this really cool reveal of being able to see what actually happened when I created that effect. But it was also really fun to start incorporating several different colors in these splatters. So I would create this little puddle, and I'd have some areas that was just mostly yellow, and then I'd go back into my paint and I got a little bit more of an orange paint and then dipped it on the other edge of this puddle that I was about to blow onto so that it would splatter out there. And it did create really cool, very subtle effects because some of the tendrils were one color and some of them were a little bit more yellow. It was really cool to see that. And I think that that's something that I could definitely utilize more in the future, putting more variations in them and see how they intermingle when this happens. And after I finished that first layer, I took my heat gun and dried it out. And I do have a link in the description to all the tools and the paints and everything that I'm using, but that heat gun is a huge part of my painting process. But after I got that yellow layer all dried out, I went back in with a second layer of splatters, and this one was mostly orange pretty much. And I really, really love this technique because I love compositions that are symmetrical. So they're very balanced, but they do have differences in them. That's really fun for me to design around. And this one works great for that because I went back in with that second layer of very orange splatters. And because I used pretty much the same amount of paint, I made the puddle pretty similar. They were visually pretty much the same weight, but they were very organic. They were things that I couldn't control how they actually ended up looking. So they did look very unique from one side to the other. And I loved that variation that I was able to get with that. And the last thing that I really liked about the splattering on this particular piece is after I finished that first main area of the yellow on that layer, I added a little bit of a disconnected spot that was separated from that. And then I spotted from that, and I actually really like how that looked, or it wasn't all one conglomeration. So this is something that I can like build up and have different sections that look even more like they're pieced apart and tearing almost. And I like that effect a lot. Okay, let's move on to the second piece of today. I ended up inking this one with a Prismacolor Cool Erase pencil, and I love these pencils, but I don't love them on this very textured cold pressed watercolor paper, and I've done it many times before, but I think this is the time that's finally drilled into my head that that is not a technique I want to use in the future for any sort of line work on this paper. So that's one nugget that I think I finally learned with this one. But moving on to the paint, like I mentioned, I wanted to use the same technique in two different ways. So the second piece is where I'm using it more as a textured background behind the main design element rather than using it to create the design element. And it did allow me to be able to try different things out, try different types of layering because it wasn't going to be a color against stark white. It was going to be blended in with other colors. So it was a new place that I could really push the experience a little bit more and be a little less fearful of it being so permanent and very distinct within the piece. So with this painting, I wanted to really push a very raw, rough, brushy edge to the painting itself. Since usually I go right up against the tape that I use to tape the piece down, this time I took one of my really fluffy, it's actually one of my favorite brushes that has this fluffy texture on the brush itself. And then I took that and I created these really rough edges around the edge. I did use the tape as a nice guideline so that I could make sure that it was pretty close to being a nice square painting without being very sharp. So I blocked that in, and I wanted this base layer to be textury as well because I was going to create this textured bottom layer and then have a splatter effect on top of that. And then as I played with it, I could build up more if I needed to in certain areas. So I had several puddles of color mixed next to me as I was creating that initial background. That way I could dip into different colors and just really play with the way that they intermingled with each other. I do actually love playing with analogous colors and letting them really mingle with watercolors. I think that looks really gorgeous because they do all flow from one color to the next. So for this one, I had a deep green and then a very blue turquoise and then a leaf green that I went in, and I just let it all paint out. And that was really freeing, actually. It's actually very fun to be able to try things that are different from the norm because it does refresh you and it helps you think of new things to do, but also appreciate things that you like about your own process that you always do. And after I let that first initial layer dry, I went in with the splatter effect for this one. So I didn't want to get overboard with the splatters. I didn't want to put so many that you can no longer distinctly tell the difference between them. So I was trying to be very strategic on where I put it. I did like having it so that it was right up against her head and then splattered out, or right up against that scarf and then splattered out. So basically it was following the contour of the design element within the page, and then it went outward. And I really enjoyed overlapping it with that white border on the paper itself so that it extended past the border that I created for the painting. And I love playing with things breaking the defiance of the painting itself. I love paintings that do that. I think it's really cool. So this one was fun because it was really easy to enact, but I really like that effect. And for both of these paintings, I went with a very limited color palette. Basically, they are analogous color schemes. So for both of the figures, I chose to paint them in gray and then have the backgrounds or certain details to be colored. And I really love working that way. It's nice to be able to enjoy the colors that I'm using, but then not worry or stress about it needing to be very cohesive with the rest, because going with gray, it is able to just flow really well all together. And I do really love having elements that are black and white against very colorful elements. So this was really fun to be able to just sit down and start painting. And I think that I ended up using a neutral tint for all of the grays. That's what makes it really helpful when you're doing watercolors, using one pigment that you use and that you're able to just keep going in, because then you can make it darker or lighter, but it's always going to have that same color root. And that is it for today. I had so much fun working with this texture. It is something that I really love the design look of it, so I think I'm absolutely going to use this one more in actual finished pieces. It works with the kind of design aesthetic that I like. But I think that I will do more videos like this where I can focus on a specific texture technique in watercolor. So I've tried them and I know of a lot of them, but a lot of them I didn't really give the full attention or the chance to be something that I like. So let me know in the description if any of you guys have a favorite way to create texture in watercolor that you'd like me to try next. And yeah, as usual, I do have these 2 little paintings available at my art shop, and I'll have a link in the description as well as in the end card that'll take you there. But yeah, I did really love these ones. I loved working on them, that is. They were really freeing, and it just opened up a lot of fun new concepts for me to work with. But again, I do have a link for my art shop, so thanks for even checking out my art shop and looking at these. But I do post every Wednesdays and Saturdays, so if you'd like more art videos, I am here. You can hit subscribe and that bell button. And that is pretty much it for today, so I'll see you guys at my next one. Bye!